Caleb Devereaux Monroe was 37 years old, and for 9 years he had been working 3 jobs while his wife built a career he quietly made possible. He rose at 4:47 every morning without an alarm. He made coffee, ate standing at the counter, and was out the door before the neighborhood dogs had started. He ran a city maintenance crew from 6 until 2. Drove for a private freight company on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and on weekends he picked up FAC installations with a subcontractor out of Decatur. 3 jobs, 1 house, 1 wife. One direction all of that money flowed. Her colleagues at the marketing agency knew her as the woman who always looked rested. They knew about her master's program she was finishing up, the car she had just leased, the vacation she had just returned from. None of them had met Caleb. Most of them, from what he understood, did not know his name. He found out what they did know on a Sunday in early March. He had come home an hour ahead of schedule. The vac job wrapped early, and he had not called ahead. He pulled into the driveway and heard voices through the kitchen window, which he had cracked himself on Friday to fix the seal. He stood at the back door with his hand on the latch, and he heard his wife's voice, confident and easy, performing for company he had not known was there. And she said it plainly, with a laugh in it, the way someone says something they have said before. She said, "He doesn't mind. He's basically my slave. I work smarter, he works harder. That's just how it is." The laughter that followed was not loud, but it was comfortable. It was the laughter of a group of women who had heard something familiar enough to agree with. Caleb stood at the back door for 11 seconds. He counted them. Then he walked around to the front of the house, got back in his truck, and drove 3 blocks to a gas station. He sat in the parking lot with the engine running and his hands on the wheel, and he did not move for a long time. He was a licensed vac technician and a certified pipe fitter, and a man who had been paid, twice in his life, for the kind of diagnostic precision that most contractors couldn't replicate without 3 return visits. He knew how to read a system. He knew what a pressure drop felt like before it showed on a gauge. He knew the difference between something that could be serviced and something that needed to be replaced entirely. In the parking lot of that gas station, for the first time in 9 years of marriage, he stopped asking whether the system could be serviced. What Renee Monroe had never thought to ask, not in 9 years of joint accounts and mortgage payments and a car lease in her name on a salary that was half of what she thought it was why a man working 3 jobs had never once asked her where the money went. She had assumed she knew the answer. She had assumed wrong. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The November before all of it, Caleb had refinished the hardwood floors in the front room on a long weekend when Renee was visiting her mother in Savannah. He had rented the drum sander himself, moved the furniture to the garage, applied 2 coats of oil-based finish with a lamb's wool applicator, and slept on an air mattress in the bedroom while the floors cured. When Renee came home on Sunday evening, she said it looked beautiful and asked if he had hired someone. He said he had done it himself. She said, "Oh," and went to check her phone. He had stood there for a moment in the middle of the room he had just rebuilt with his own hands, and then he had put the air mattress away. The house was a modest 3-bedroom in the Vine City neighborhood of Atlanta, purchased in 2018. His name was on the deed. His down payment, $31,000 saved over 4 years of the 3rd job, before she even knew the 3rd job existed, had been the foundation of it. He had chosen the neighborhood for what it was becoming, not what it looked like then, because his grandmother, Ida Bell Monroe, had spent 50 years watching Atlanta neighborhoods dismissed and then discovered. And she had told him early, "You buy the block that everybody overlooks, and you stay patient. Patient men build the wealth. Impatient men just build the debt." Ida Bell had passed 2 winters ago. He still had her cast-iron skillet on his stove. He cooked with it every morning. He had met Renee at a charity 5K in 2014, Piedmont Park, a cool October morning. She was with a group of coworkers, and she had stopped to fix her shoelace near the start line, and he had nearly tripped over her and caught himself and said something that made her laugh. And the laugh had been easy and real, and he had decided in that moment that he wanted to hear it again. They had run the last 2 miles side by side. He had asked for her number. She gave it without hesitation. He had believed, for most of the years that followed, that a woman who laughed that easily was a woman who was not performing. He had been wrong about that too. Or she had changed. He was never entirely sure which. He worked the Sunday fact job the next morning as though nothing had shifted. He came home. He cooked dinner from what was in the refrigerator. Renee came downstairs in workout clothes and sat at the kitchen island and scrolled through something on her phone and said, "Smells good," without looking up. He served 2 plates. They ate. She talked about a project at the agency. He listened and answered when she asked questions, which was not often. His other phone, the one registered to a business name she had never inquired about, stayed in the left breast pocket of his work vest, where it had always been. On Monday, he called his financial advisor, a man named Harold Gates, and asked him to pull the last 24 months of activity across 4 accounts Renee did not know existed. Harold said he would have it ready by Wednesday. Caleb said he appreciated it. He was back on the crew by 6:03. The discovery had started, in the truest sense, not at the back door, but 3 months earlier, when Caleb noticed a pattern in the joint checking account he had never had reason to examine closely. He had always managed the household bills, mortgage, utilities, insurance from his city job income and a portion of the freight driving. He had never asked Renee for a detailed accounting of her salary, which was $74,000 a year. He had assumed it went to her car, her graduate program tuition, her clothing budget, and savings. He had not asked to see the savings. He had trusted the architecture of the arrangement he believed they had. 3 months before the Sunday, at the back door, a routine check of the mortgage servicer's portal showed a payment that had processed 2 days late. He had called the servicer. The representative mentioned a returned ache from the joint account. He had logged into the joint account and found the balance at $214. He paid the mortgage from his freight income that afternoon, and then he started looking. The joint account had carried, on average, between $1,400 and $2,100 throughout 2022. By spring of 2023, the average balance had dropped below $600. Renee's direct deposit, which he had never watched closely because he had assumed she was contributing meaningfully, had stopped appearing in the joint account in February. He went back through the statements. She had been redirecting her full paycheck to a separate account since January of that year, 11 months earlier. He photographed every statement. He cross-referenced 11 months of utility payments, grocery charges, gas station charges. All of them, without exception, had come from his accounts, not from hers. He went further. He pulled the joint credit card statements. $3,400 in charges over 9 months he did not recognize. Spas, restaurants, a weekend hotel in Savannah on dates that didn't match the visit she had told him about. He photographed those too. His hands didn't shake. He was a diagnostician. He read pressure differentials for a living. What he was reading now was not ambiguous. It was a system that had been quietly redirected, load by load, until only one source was bearing the weight, and the other was drawing from it without contribution. He had been the boiler. She had been the thermostat. He opened a folder on his laptop and named it simply Vine City. Then he pulled up the business registration he had filed quietly in 2020. Devereaux Technical Services, LLC. Registered in Georgia under his middle name, and he called Harold Gates. By Wednesday, he had the full picture. Harold laid it out across a single spreadsheet, clean and sourced. Devereaux Technical Services had generated $118,000 in net income over the previous 24 months. Caleb's 3 separate personal savings accounts, all premarital or non-marital by documentation, held a combined balance of $214,000. The house, appraised 8 months ago for a different purpose, had come in at $388,000 against a remaining mortgage of $191,000. The equity was real, and it was documented, and his name was the only name on the deed. He sat with the spreadsheet for a long time. She had called him her slave to women he had never met. She had said it with a laugh. He closed the laptop and drove to a barber shop in Midtown, where a man named Terrence Okafor cut hair and had known Caleb since they were 11 years old on the same street in Vine City. He sat in the chair and told Terrence enough of it that Terrence understood the shape of it without needing every number. Terrence was quiet for a moment, working the clippers with the same even hand he always had. She said it in front of people, Terrence said. It wasn't a question. In front of people, Caleb confirmed. Terrence finished the fade before he spoke again. Then she made it public before you did. He brushed Caleb's shoulders and met his eyes in the mirror. You just got to decide what public looks like on your end. Caleb drove home. He made dinner. He set 2 plates on the table. The attorney was a woman named Brenda Colquitt. She kept an office on Auburn Avenue, 3rd floor, one window that looked out over the street. She had been practicing family law in Atlanta for 22 years, and she reviewed documents with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen every version of this situation and was no longer moved by any of them, which was, Caleb had decided, exactly what he needed. She read through the spreadsheet Harold had prepared. She read through the bank statements Caleb had photographed. She examined the business registration. She looked at the mortgage deed. She set everything down and folded her hands. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, she said, which means marital assets are divided fairly, not automatically equally. The key question is what's marital and what isn't. She tapped the page with the LLC documentation. This entity was formed prior to marriage? 2020, Caleb said. We married in 2015. She made a note, formed during marriage. That's more complex. But the funding source matters. If you can document that Devereaux Technical was capitalized from premarital savings or non-marital income, your freight income, your installation side work, and that she had no documented contribution to it, the income it generated stays closer to your column. She didn't know it existed, he said. Brenda looked at him over her reading glasses. She didn't know your business existed. She didn't ask. A beat passed. No, Brenda said. I don't suppose she did. She made another note. The redirected salary is the most significant issue. 11 months of her full paycheck going to a separate account while the marital household was funded entirely by you, that's a documented financial imbalance that the court will consider. She paused. I'll need her account statements to quantify the accumulation. How do we get those? Discovery, she said simply. She'll have to produce them. She set her pen down. You did the right thing documenting before you said anything. A lot of men come in here after they've confronted and argued and given the other party time to move things. You didn't do that. She looked at him steadily. Now we build the case. He thanked her. He walked out into the late afternoon light on Auburn Avenue and stood for a moment on the sidewalk. A block down, a woman was walking a dog past the corner where his grandmother used to buy sweet potatoes from a man who came on Saturdays with a truck. The corner looked different now. Most things did. He called his Uncle Merritt from the car, his mother's older brother, a retired civil engineer who had spent 30 years with the city of Atlanta and who had always been in the Monroe family. The person who saw around corners before other people knew there was a turn coming. Merritt listened for 20 minutes without interrupting. You've been working 3 jobs for 9 years, Merritt said at the end of it. Yes, sir. And she's been parking her check in a private account for 11 months. Yes, sir. Merritt was quiet. You know what your grandmother would say. I know, Caleb said. She'd say, a mule that carries the whole load and gets called a mule deserves to put the load down. A pause. You put it down, son. Just do it right. That's why I called Brenda, Caleb said. Good, Merritt said. Then you don't need my advice. You just needed to hear it said out loud. Yes, sir. Then I'll say it again. Put the load down. 2 days later, Caleb drove out to Merritt's place in Stone Mountain, and the two of them sat on the back porch drinking sweet tea and going through a secondary question that Brenda had raised: the house. The property had been purchased entirely with Caleb's funds, but 9 years of joint residence and a mortgage carried under a joint financial arrangement could complicate a clean separation of equity. Merritt, who understood the language of municipal finance better than most, walked through the logic with him the way he had walked Caleb through homework problems 30 years ago. Patient, sequential, specific. You've got the deed, the down payment records, and the renovation receipts? Merritt asked. Everything. Brenda's seen them? She has them. Merritt nodded. Then the story's already written. You're just reading it out loud. That week, Caleb came home each evening, cooked dinner, responded to questions, watched the news for 20 minutes, and went upstairs. Renee did not notice any change in him, which confirmed something he had suspected for longer than he wanted to say. She was not watching him closely. She never had been. She had been watching the income, the maintenance, the hot water, the hardwood floors, not the man who produced them. He was the infrastructure. She had never once read the blueprints. Some things you don't say. You just document them and move forward. The conversation happened on a Thursday evening in Brenda Colquitt's conference room, small and direct, no windows, a round table with 4 chairs. Caleb was there, and Brenda, and Harold Gates, who had prepared a revised summary document in a clean binder with tab sections. Renee arrived with her attorney, a man named Philip Barr, who had the hurried look of someone brought in without adequate preparation time. He had received the initial documentation package from Brenda Forty 8 hours earlier, and from his expression when he sat down, he had not fully processed all of it. Renee looked across the table at Caleb with an expression he recognized: composed, careful, scanning for the angle. He had seen it when she negotiated with service contractors. He had never expected to see it directed at him across a conference table. He looked back at her calmly. He said nothing. Brenda opened the meeting with a brief summary of the documentation in the binder. She named the accounts. She named the amounts. She named the 11-month period during which Renee's salary had been entirely redirected. She named the joint credit card charges. Philip Barr's pen stopped moving around page 7. Harold placed a second document on the table. This is a 24-month income summary for Devereaux Technical Services, LLC, registered in Georgia in 2020. Net income over that period is $118,000. The entity was funded from non-marital savings documented from the period 2016 through 2019. He slid a copy toward Philip Barr. The supporting documentation is tabbed behind it. Renee's composure did not break, but something behind her eyes recalculated. I didn't know about that account, she said. Her voice was even. No, Caleb said quietly. You didn't ask. Philip put his hand briefly on her arm. The house, Brenda said, was purchased in 2018 with a documented down payment of $31,000 derived entirely from Mr. Monroe's pre-marital savings and side income. The deed is in his name. The renovation records 18 months of materials receipts and labor documentation for improvements that increase the appraised value by approximately $44,000 are tabbed in Section 4. She did not look up from the binder. He built most of it himself. A silence held in the room for a moment. Renee leaned toward her attorney and said something quietly. Philip wrote something on his legal pad. He looked at the binder. He looked at Harold. He looked at Caleb. My client would like to discuss. Philip began. She can discuss anything she'd like through you and Brenda, Caleb said. He kept his voice level. He folded his hands on the table. I'm not here to argue. The numbers are documented. The property is documented. Devereaux Technical is documented. He paused. I worked 3 jobs for 9 years to build what you're looking at in that binder. Every receipt, every transfer, every deposit, documented. I'm just here so you understand what you're looking at before we move into formal proceedings. Renee looked at him with an expression that was difficult to read. Not grief, not anger exactly, Something more like the look of someone who had made a calculation and was now confronting how badly the math had failed her. She tried once. She said his name, quietly, with the weight of 9 years in it. She said she thought they could work through it. She said things had gotten out of hand and that she had made mistakes. It was Philip who answered, gently, covering her hand with his. "Renee," he said, "let's let the attorneys. We'll be in touch." Brenda said. Caleb gathered the binder and placed it in his bag. He stood. He buttoned his jacket, the good one. The one he had bought himself 3 years ago after completing a contract that Renee had known nothing about. He looked at his wife one final time across the table, and what he saw was a woman he had loved for 9 years, who had made of that love a calculation, and he felt the particular sorrow of a man who had built something solid and was now clear-eyed enough to see where the load had actually been resting. He walked out. The elevator was waiting. He rode it down to Auburn Avenue and stood in the March air and breathed. Some loads, he thought, were worth putting down. 7 months had passed like a quiet current. Caleb was standing in the backyard of a house in Vine City, not the 3-bedroom on the block where he had grown up, which had sold in May for $411,000 and settled cleanly under Brenda's guidance, but a different house, 4 blocks south, a 2-story Craftsman he had found in January when he was still in the middle of proceedings and already thinking ahead. He had purchased it in cash. He had been renovating it since April. The back porch was new, pressure-treated lumber, the posts set in concrete he had mixed and poured on 2 consecutive Saturdays in May. A ceiling fan he had wired himself overhead. The yard had been a tangle of overgrown fescue when he bought the property. He had cleared it himself and seeded it with a drought-tolerant mix and watered it through the summer. And it had come in thick and even, the kind of green that meant the roots had taken. He was installing crown molding in the back bedroom when his phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Diane Ellison, 41, who worked in urban planning for the city of Atlanta and had grown up 2 neighborhoods over from Vine City, and who had, when they met at Merritt's 4th of July gathering, asked Caleb what he was building with the same directness that people who actually build things use when they ask the question. He had told her about the Craftsman. She had asked about the bones of it. They had talked for an hour and a half on Merritt's back porch while everything else went on around them. "I'm finishing the molding in the back bedroom," he said. "I'll be done by 6. "I'll bring food," she said. "I know you won't stop to cook." She knew him, already, in the particular way that comes not from years of proximity, but from attention. He had not had to explain himself to her. She had just watched how he moved and understood. He finished the molding. He set the nail gun down. He stood back and looked at the run of it. Clean corner joints, no gaps. Level within 1/16 of an inch, and he felt the quiet satisfaction that good work produced in him. The same satisfaction it had always produced, and the same that it would keep producing, because it had never been for anyone else. What had become of Renee Monroe in those 7 months was a matter Caleb had not sought out but had absorbed through the ordinary channels of a shared city. The agency had let her go in May, a restructuring she had described on her professional profile as a voluntary transition. The private savings account that Brenda had subpoenaed through discovery had held $38,400, less than Caleb had anticipated, which told him that 11 months of redirected salary had been going somewhere beyond accumulation. Where exactly was not his concern. It was hers. The settlement had been equitable and final, and Brenda had described the outcome as about as clean as these things get, which Caleb took as the professional equivalent of a compliment. He had run into Renee's mother, Sylvia, once at a grocery store in Decatur. Sylvia had looked at him with an expression that was not quite apology and not quite accusation. Something in between. The look of a woman who loved her daughter and could not fully acquit her. Caleb had greeted her by name and asked about her hip replacement, and meant it, because Sylvia had never done anything to him and deserved that much. They had parted without discussing Renee. Devereaux Technical Services had signed 2 new service contracts in June. Combined value, $161,000 over 18 months. He had hired a second technician in July, a young man from Mechanicsville named Quentin, who reminded Caleb of himself at 24. Precise, quiet, learning everything through his hands. Caleb was teaching him the way his grandfather had taught him. You don't rush the diagnosis. You read the system. You find the actual failure point before you touch a tool. Diane arrived at 6:15 with West Indian takeout in a paper bag, and she stood in the doorway of the back bedroom and looked at the crown molding for a long moment. "That's clean," she said. "It is," he agreed. She set the food down on the new kitchen counter, and they ate standing up, looking out the back window at the yard he had grown from seed. She asked about the next phase of the renovation, the front porch, the bathroom tile, the kitchen cabinet fronts he was making himself from white oak he had sourced from a mill in Gainesville. He told her about the grain pattern he was working with. She listened the way she always listened, fully, with questions that showed she had actually heard the previous sentence. He had built everything worth keeping. The cast iron skillet Ida Bell had left him sat on the new stove, seasoned and ready. The yard was green. The mortgage was retired. The molding was level within a 16th of an inch. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.